So Woodrow Wilson was the 28th president of the United States from 1913 to 1921, and Wilson just didn't agree with the founders that the purpose of our government was to protect the rights of the people. No. Woodrow Wilson thought that government should do, quote, what the times demand. Could you be more vague? Could there be more vulnerability to abuse when you are that vague? Wilson also very naively envisioned this neutral administrative class, neutral, and I'm talking about politically neutral, who would supposedly operate the government from an administration perspective in good faith, supposedly, again, without being influenced by politics. And I can't even get this sentence out because it's so unbelievable to me. Amazing that after just over 100 years since the US literally fought a war against bad faith, tyrannical politicians in England, that an American president could be so naive and so dumb as to think that mankind no longer has a lust for power and that we can staff an unaccountable bureaucratic federal government with neutral employees who would make rules only in good faith without letting politics tinge them. It's so ridiculous, so absurd. Woodrow Wilson also argued that it was time for the Constitution to evolve. He wanted a living Constitution. Now, this actually stands to reason because Wilson was inspired by a college professor named Frank Goodnow. Frank Goodnow openly argued that the Founding Fathers' theory that government's purpose was to protect the natural rights of the citizens was, quote, worse than useless, because such a theory, quote, retards development. What development, bro? What development? Human nature is human nature. Human nature is timeless. The only thing that develops is ideology. We don't want an ideological government. Okay. Now, for many years in our nation, these radical progressive ideas were stopped by the non-delegation theory, which, as the name suggests, it did not allow the legislature to give away their power to unaccountable executive agencies, right? And this is where the Supreme Court had a role in this. But following Woodrow Wilson's presidency and his radical progressive ideas permeating at least the political class and prepping the foundation for the future administrative state, the deep state, this swamp that we're talking about, after the year 1935, the Supreme Court stopped applying the non-delegation theory altogether. And what did we get as a result? We got FDR's New Deal. The FDR's New Deal actually created the new bureaucracy in the executive branch that Woodrow Wilson had just envisioned. A new executive bureaucracy that didn't just include executive powers as delegated by the Constitution, but also included legislative and judicial powers, not delegated by the Constitution. A critical violation of the separation of powers in our federal government as laid out in the United States Constitution. So first, FDR. Then we got LBJ's Great Society, which just further damaged the separation of powers and instead empowered swamp creatures to rule behind the backs of our elected officials, which, again, this could not have happened if our elected officials had not given away their own power, which they have zero right to do. And by the way, Woodrow Wilson's idea of this politically neutral class of administrative state civil servants, let's check out how did that work out. How did that work out? Well, according to FEC records, as reported by The Hill, 95% of political donations during the 2016 election, this from federal government employees, went to Hillary Clinton. 95%. Yeah. So much for politically neutral, unencumbered by partisan political agendas. Did not happen. So as you can see, what used to be a relatively straightforward federal government structure, the legislative branch made the laws, the executive branch enforced the laws, and the judicial branch ensured that laws didn't violate the Constitution, this was just turned on its head. It was eviscerated. And so now what we face, it's not just a matter of one or two or three or a dozen corrupt deep state operatives violating our rights. It's not one Fauci or two Faucis. It's a structural problem at the highest levels of our government, a fundamental violation of the separation of powers as dictated by our Constitution. So you can also see then why simply firing Fauci or firing any other individual swamp creature is kind of like playing whack-a-mole. If you fire one, another one's just going to pop up in the same place unless we fix the fundamental problem. Unfortunately, one president cannot fix this problem alone. It requires the legislative branch to stop delegating their power to the executive agencies, and it requires the judiciary to reject the administrative state on a constitutional basis. The problem is Congress members, this includes many Republicans, they don't actually want to drain the swamp. No. The swamp makes Congress's job easy. With the deep state in place, making the rules, Congress doesn't have to legislate anything. They don't have to think about details. More importantly, to them at least, they don't have to take positions that might be unpopular. They don't even have to consider whether their policies are actually going to work. They don't have to do anything unpopular that might threaten their chances at re-election. No. Congress actually has it easy with the swamp structure in place. All they do is they pass vague laws that defer all the details to the executive agencies who make the rules. And if anything goes wrong, anything goes south, Congress can point their finger in blame at the executive branch instead. So unless we force our elected officials, our Congress member, they're supposed to represent us, unless we force them to reject the administrative state and instead take responsibility for their own legislative jobs, unless our elected officials then reject judicial nominees who would allow the violation of separation of powers, well, I'm sorry to tell you, we're never really going to drain the swamp. Instead, we're going to be left with innumerable Faucis. We're going to be left with a CDC that rejects science in favor of fear and ideology that inspires a child-abusing bus driver to slap a little girl in the face because she pulled her mask under her nose.